During the secret war in Lao, there were many exceptional Royal Lao and Hmong pilots, but today I'm going to tell you about a specific Royal Lao Air Force pilot known to U.S. pilots by the call sign he later assigned himself, Shithot. He was known for his flight aggressiveness and chancing death on every mission. Ravens who knew him and one A1E skyraider combat pilot who met him will tell us some stories about this legendary pilot. The words and quotes are theirs, but not the voices unless you see them on film. For context, listen for a moment to the current Sergeant Major of the U.S. Army, Michael Weimer.
I have a fair amount of combat, maybe a little more than the average individual. I've never been to war. Not war like we're talking about, large scale combat operations. And if you haven't watched the Pacific series lately, you know the difference between going to combat and then coming back and going to the KBR gym in the KBR Chow Hall and salsa night on a Wednesday. That is not war.
In World War II, some Americans left home in 1942, not returning until 1945. But even as harrowing and sacrificial as that experience was, our war was fought on someone else's soil. How awful it must be to fight for your very existence in your own homeland and fly until you die. That was the reality for Hmong and Lao pilots who were fighting in their land for their very existence and way of life. That truly is war. I encourage you to watch a short film on Hmong pilots as told by their American trainers about their superb combat and flying skills. The Aviation Heritage Center of Wisconsin produced a wonderful video on these pilots, which the center has now placed on Facebook. That Hmong and Lao pilots could fly planes before ever driving a car is remarkable. So here is some background of, and stories on, Shithot and his unfortunate death. First, the definition of some terms you will hear. There is no correct English spelling because Lao and Hmong words have sounds that do not translate directly into English words. Chop a cow was the call sign for a Hmong pilot at Longchang. They primarily flew A or T-28s. Rassasi was the call sign for a Lao pilot. Shithot flew at Longchang with Royal Lao pilots in the Royal Lao Air Force before Vang Pao got his Hmong Air Force. Once the Hmong pilots were trained and deployed and assigned to Longchang, the Royal Lao were withdrawn and sent to other military regions. Shithot got his nickname, later his call sign, while flying at Longchang. He was always extremely aggressive as a fighter pilot and was known to press the target. That means press the target lower than normal drop parameters to ensure a hit on a target. He would often press the target so low that the bomb might not have time to arm and the bomb would hit the target but would not explode, although he took measures to correct that.
And while I was going through our training at Holly Field, we had a day that I think it was a weather day, but it was a day when we were all on the ground. So this day we were sitting down on the ground. They took us all into a Quonset hut to show us a movie. And the movie they showed us was one of the instructors had a movie of Laos. One part of that movie was a T-28 flying inverted up the length of the runway. And the guy told us, here's a shit hot fighter pilot. And basically, that was shit hot. I actually saw him before I even went to Southeast Asia and then met him after I got there. Two of our best Lao backseaters, Panti and Kaman, were both shot down and killed in action. One was shot down with Hal Mishler when he was shot down. The other was shot down with one of our Nakatan FACs. This is a Laotian FAC who's a T-28 flight lead who we qualified in the '01 and used him to direct airstrikes with the Laotian Air Force. The one that was shot down and killed was Rasasi Shithot. He's a famous personality in the Vietnam War. He was famous with American fighter pilots as well as the FACs that worked with him. And when he was shot down, it was such a big deal, the ambassador came down for the funeral.
I met one of the pilots that had come down to fly back one of the A-28s, and his nickname was Chapakawa Shithot. And I soon learned why. Everyone told him, "Hey, you're shit hot when you fly that A-28." And he told me, he says, I got a lot better with my accuracy and I'm doing a lot more damage now. And he says, I can put the bomb through the door. And that's exactly the way he put it. And I said, well, what are you talking about? So he showed me on a static display. They had a T-28 there that they were loading Mark 82s on for training. And he went over and he said, this bomb, he said, when you release it, he says the propeller in the front of the Mark 82, it has to turn so many revolutions before the firing mechanism is up against the igniter. And it was like, say, 10 revolutions. And he said, you have to drop it high enough so it can arm, was what he was telling me. But he said, if you take the arming wire out and then you crank the propeller down about 8 turns, he said, it needs about 2 more turns before it's up against the firing pin. And I said, are you kidding me? He said, yeah. He said, I can get a lot lower when I drop that bomb and it gets armed and it goes right in the door. I said, okay, but what about your T-28? I said, you're pulling off, you're taking frags, you're taking everything. He said, yeah. He said, sometimes not so good, sometimes not so good. So he was well known for just flying and fighting for his family, for his country. I mean, he had his flag all over himself and trying to fight the Pathet Lao and do what he could do. But
Other times, pilots would press the target so low that the shrapnel and debris from the strike and explosion would ricochet back up into the plane, wounding, damaging their aircraft, or even killing them. While he was flying at Longcheng with the Chapakau call sign, FACs and ground commanders alike started telling him over the radio that he dropped shit-hot bombs, meaning he was darn good at putting ordnance on target. One day he woke up and changed his call sign from Chapakau and his flight's color, for instance, Chapakau brown or Chapakau green, to Chapakau shit-hot.
He actually was not Laotian. His real name was Bun Tong. He's ethnic North Vietnamese. His family actually emigrated from North Vietnam early in the war and came in and bought a citizenship and bought him a commission in the Laotian Air Force. And then he became one of our flight leads. He started out as a Chapakawa and then was flying with us as a Rasasi. Well, Shithot was very well known. When he was flying as a Chapakawa, the Longchan, and as he would take off, then he would contact the ABCCC, the Airborne Command Post up there, and tell him that Chapakawa Shithot. He was off from Longchan and he goes to fly in MR2. The radio operators at the ABCCC got all upset, said, "Oh, you can't say that on the radio." And he kind of got quiet and continued flying. And they came back the next day. He takes off and he checks in as Chapakawa Shithot, fuck it on the wing, which was his number 2 band. That's what he was using as a call sign. And they got all upset, said he couldn't cuss on the radio. You can't use that kind of language on the radio. And he gets quiet for a second, and then he comes back and says, "This Chapakawa Shithot." He says, "My country, my radio." And that was the last they said about it.
Craig During, Raven 27, says,
I remember that I was flying one day and I heard Chapakaw fuck it, Cole Cricket. That was our airborne command and control post. The radio operator on Cricket said something like, "Say again the call sign." Fuck it, he repeated. Then radio operator responded with, go ahead, Chapakau, Phuket. We were all in hysterics. The Lao pilots that I got to know were Frenchie and Cisse. Frenchie was attempting to learn how to fly on instruments and flew into a mountain in the midst of a cloud, while Cisse shot himself down while strafing too low. Lots of ricochets. When they pulled his body out of the wreckage, he had a large hole in his chest. Chad Swedberg was thanking him in on a target and warned him not to fly so low. Cisse brushed him off, and the rest is history.
When he came down to Hoxay, that's all we knew now was Chapakau or by that time Rassisi Shithot. He was a flight lead. He was one of the best bombers they had. He was known for his bombing, and the way he got his name was bombing. And the facts would come back and say, "Oh, Shithot bombs, Shithot bombs." So he started calling himself that. The only problem we had with Shithot was getting him to drop his bombs high enough that they had time to arm, because he really pressed on the targets. And for him, the bombs were everything. We had John Rhodes at our bar one time. We were all standing around the bar and talking and drinking, and we had CIA guys there and a bunch of Lao fighter pilots and stuff. And I hear a bit of a kerfuffle when I turn around, and there's Shithot with his 45 out, aimed at John Rhodes's nose. And I came across and kind of talked him into putting his gun back and asked what the problem was. He says, "Oh, he'd tell me I dropped number 10 bombs." and Shithot was not going to stand for that. So he was a bit of a volatile personality. He was known, our maintenance guys all tell the story of him coming back after dropping some bad bombs and shooting his aircraft.
John Swanson, Raven 28, tells that.
I worked with Shithot a number of times when he flew out of Longchang. He was an outstanding bomber. One time, the target were supplies in a bomb crater on the PDJ. He asked, should he hit the supplies on the east or west side? I jokingly said, the west side. Darn if he didn't precisely hit the target. And his wingman took out the ones on the east side. Shithot asked for a harder target next time. I bought them beer that night at the Raven Bar.
I do remember once going out, pre-flying an airplane toward the end of my tour. One of the Lao pilots had just come in from a mission. Shithot was his name. He used to fly the T-28s. But when we started to transition from the Raven back, leaving the forward air control job to Lao pilots, Shithot volunteered. One of the reasons was he flew more hours and got more pay. And I think he was more involved with the mission, more time over target, and I think that really got him excited. But I was pre-fighting the airplane, and I found 2 bullet holes, small arms, about 18 inches outside the cockpit. I went in this briefing room, and I said, Shithot, you took 2 hits on the airplane? He said, yeah. He had no idea he'd been hit. Later in my tour, Shithot was shot down about 30 kilometers to the due east of our base, and he was picked up with his backseater.
Shithot didn't have a temper, but I always got along well with him. You did have to be tactful in making his ordnance corrections, or he would take offense. I remember one day I had to correct him on a strike, and while I was looking at the target, I heard him say, "Be careful, Raven. I have a tiny pistol." He was telling me he still had 50 caliber strafe left. I turned around and looked, and he had lowered his flaps and slowed down and was struggling to stay behind me. Slowing down to stay with an 01 was a tactical error on his part. No pilot ever likes another aircraft at 6 o'clock. I pulled my nose up and pulled into a barrel roll. He tried to go with me, but couldn't stay with me, as he was approaching a stall. I fell in behind him, worried about what would come next. Luckily, he started laughing and said, "Oh, Raven, very good."
Here is some rare homemade film made at Paksay, Lima 11. It is the Armed Forces Day, May 1970 celebration, and there are many high-ranking U.S. and Lao dignitaries in attendance, and quite the festivities with much food and drink. Note Prince Bon Homme of the royal family of Champasak is in attendance. He was once the Prime Minister of Laos and at this time was a high-ranking dignitary. General Pasuk is in attendance, one of the most senior of the Southern Lao officers. This film, for a short time, focuses prominently on a Royal Lao Air Force officer, clearly important to be at this event and quite familiar with the Americans. I asked Ravens Lou Hatch and Jay Johnson, who were stationed at Paksay and flew with Shithot, to view this film. And while they both said they can't confirm this officer is Shithot due to the passage of time, they believe it is. CIA paramilitary officer Tom Briggs identified some of the Americans in this film, which I will show at a future date. As the Ravens related in the video Ravens 2, the motto for the Lao and Hmong pilots were, "Fly until you die." They had no break in service. They knew their eventual fate.
Fly till you die. They weren't getting an assignment to Florida. The only assignment they had was combat until you die. Of course, they're fighting for their own country.
I was at Longchen longer than any other Raven, and it was because of a glitch in the personnel system. As time went on, I became more and more tense. I was unable to recover from day to day with all the pressure that was on. And I became very discouraged because it looked like the American government was not coming up with a solution. In other words, how do we win this war? We lost 8 Ravens while I was there. We lost several Lao and Hmong backseaters, pilots, all kinds. Plus, that isn't even including the soldiers, of course. I had a discussion with one of my Hmong friends. I was expressing myself and saying, why aren't you taking that hill? Why aren't you going out and handling it? He says, in a couple of months, you're going to go home and you won't have to do this anymore. We take the hill, we lose the hill. We take the hill, we lose the hill, and eventually I get killed. And he says, that's the way it is over here. I was shocked with the reality of what was happening. So it was just a matter of time, and they all knew they were all going to die if the war didn't stop.
These guys flew 8-9 sorties a day. Their preferred dive angle was 90 degrees, which can make you very accurate.
Right on target.
When you're doing that every day, you get to be pretty damned expert at it. The Hmong pilots' motto was fly until you die. Of the 8 Hmong T-28 pilots that were there when I arrived, 1 survived. And they knew they were going to die.
As the war went on, we selected our best T-28 flight leads to be Noka-10 FACs. They checked out in the 01 and would direct Lao T-28s on target. That all flew most of the time as T-28 flight leads, and then some of the time they would take turns as a Noka-10 FAC. Shithot was flying under his FAC call sign Noka-10 402 when he was shot down and killed with one of our best backseaters, called X-Rays, on 4 November. It was on the side of a mountain overlooking Kong Sidon. The enemy was firing mortars and rockets at the town from the caves on the side of the mountain down on the town. Shithot worked the first sortie. I relieved him. A little while later, he came back and relieved me. I went back to rearm and refuel and grab a sandwich. They told me that Shithot was down, so I took another Ravens aircraft that had already been refueled and went back up to work his search and rescue, but his plane was a smoking wreckage.
To close, you'll be very excited for a new video coming up called Vang Pao Stories You Never Knew. I guarantee this will be a fascinating video revealing to you several stories you have not heard. And what's more, I have 1954 film of Vang Pao. It's very short, it's not the best quality, but you'll see him as he looked at 24 years of age as he was leading Hmong soldiers on the way to Dien Bien Phu during the Viet Minh siege of that fort. His mission was to seize terrain near Dien Bien Phu and hold open escape corridors for the French soldiers. One closing note, Li Lu was also a very legendary and daring Lao pilot. You can learn more about him in Ravens 2. Thank you so much for watching. I am ever grateful for your support of my channel.